In today's video, I would like to show you a match which I've played against the current World Championship challenger, Grandmaster Sindarov. That was in 2024 in those chess.com online tournaments, which I've often played in. This specific one is called it was called the CrunchLab Masters. They used to have this system where you have a play-in, and if you score, I think I scored 4.5 out of 9 in the Swiss play-in, then you can qualify to certain groups. If you have a great placement in the play-in stage, then you get to a higher bracket. And if you're one of the lower players in the play-in, then you get to a lower bracket. And that was also in the bracket which I was in. And I had a mini match against Javokhir Sindarov then. It was a rapid match, but since he was on such a roll now, I thought it would be interesting to show those games, because actually I was quite close to winning that match, I would say. Yeah, so in the first game I had white pieces. It was a match, so it was on 2 games. Speaking about a match, I've been a bit inactive for now because I'm preparing myself for my match against Navarra, which is starting in less than 2 weeks by now. And in this match, it was, I think the time control was 10+10 for 2 games. And if the 2 games are tied, so if it's 1-1, then you play the Armageddon game, which we're about to see did also happen in this match. Now, in the first game, I had the white pieces, and I went for knight f3, knight f6, g3, g6. Sindarov back then was almost a pure King-Sinian player, as far as I remember. Nowadays, he's switching things up way more from the black side as well as from the white side as well. And I went for the double Fianchetto with b3, bishop g7, bishop b2, d6, and now d4, aiming to stop black from getting e5. And after short castle bishop g2, to my big surprise, he anyway went for e5, which, especially on this moment, is quite a dubious move. If black wants to do so, he should go knight d7 first, wait for me to castle, and only then to go for e5. Because as we will see in the game, white even has ideas to castle queenside if black goes immediately for e5. But also this does not have the greatest reputation. What often happens is something like this. And then if black takes, then white gets a very nice position, because white doesn't really want to play e4 in this position anyway, because it would restrict the bishop on g2. And I have very easy moves like queen c2, rook d1, knight has a great square on d5, and this is just very pleasant for white. So according to the theory, the best move here should be c5. And after short castle, c takes d4, knight takes d4, there's this move d5, which actually transposes to some other lines, but this tends to be quite dry from the black side, so people have been experimenting with the move b5 as well, aiming for a double Fianchetto himself, gaining some space. I actually had one game here in the Austrian Rapid Championship in the final round, which I was able to win. I think the best setup for white, also what I played then, is to go for queen d3, a6, and then something like knight d2 followed by c4. But I think that black is pretty okay in this position as well. So this is one of the good lines. Quick mention to my King-Sinian course from the black side. What did I recommend? It was knight d7, short castle, and now the move rook e8. And after c4, the move c6, which I think is quite smart. Because still, if e5 comes, then the problem is, like, black would always like to recapture with a pawn, but here it doesn't work because white can take on e5. And if black takes back, then white just won a pawn in the end of all of that. So that was my idea, to play c6, wait for white to play knight c3, and only then to go for e5, because now, after taking, white does not have this resource knight takes e5 anymore, and black should be completely fine. So I think this is a pretty good line for black as well, especially since, anyway, King-Sinian players usually want to go for e5, and I think this is one pretty decent way to make it happen. But he went for e5, I took on e5, knight fd7, the only way, or knight g4 would be another way to regain the pawn, but he went for this, and now knight c3. Obviously I could also go for c4, but I knew this line already for some time, that this is a very nice extra option for white here. And it looks a bit strange here, this development to block the bishop on b2, but as we will see, it will make a lot of sense. Knight takes e5, knight takes e5. He recaptured with the d-pawn. If he takes with the bishop, then we have this plan, queen d2, queen set castle, and then white will just start attacking on the king side. And even objectively, this position is extremely bad for black already. I think last time I looked here, it was around +1. And in practice, it's very difficult for black to play. So he took with the pawn, but now I get a very pleasant endgame. I took and went knight d5. He has to defend c7 with rook d7, because if he goes knight e6, then I give a check, can take on c8, and then on the next move, I can take on b7, and I will just be winning. So he played rook d7, queen set castle, now knight c6. And I was just thinking if he could go c6 here as well, but it already looks like I could have some tricks here. I don't know if I can maybe play knight e7, take here. I mean, that is probably completely winning with bishop a3 coming next, or rook d1, followed by rook d8. Shouldn't be good for black. So he went knight c6, and now I think I went for quite a logical continuation with rook d2. I quickly checked with the engine before, who really likes to play g4 here, just making it more difficult for black to play f5, and gives almost a winning advantage here. Also, rook d2 keeps a big advantage, but g4 was even stronger, because now he got f5, rook hd1, rook f7, just stepping out of the d file, otherwise I could have maybe some discoveries. Now I went knight e3, which already prepared one idea which I was able to get, which is the positional threat of bishop takes c6. Of course, getting rid of this fianchettoed bishop often also has disadvantages, especially with queens on the board and the king castled to king side. But especially in this endgame, it's quite a big threat, I would say, because the king is never really going to be in any danger, and the light squares don't really matter so much here. He went bishop e6, which allowed me to take on c6. I think it would have been much better for him to go for e4 here, after which I would have probably taken and went for f3. Also here I still have quite an annoying pressure because my pieces are all in the game, and still have ideas to take on c6. But yeah, black does have some chances for survival here. Like, I think he can take and maybe go b6. Bishop e7, still black is suffering, but I think it would have been better than the game. Yeah, he went bishop e6, now I took. Went rook d8 check, and of course now he always has problems with the doubled pawns on the queen side. He went for rook f8. Also here I looked, and he should have taken on d8 first and then go for rook f8, which would give him a bit of a better version, and I would probably now need to take, because if I go back then I lose a lot of time. But still, also here, I mean, he's suffering for sure. I have many ideas to continue. I could maybe put the bishop to c5 or just continue with c4, and he struggles to play e4. He struggles to do many things here, even trying to go for some opposite color bishop endgame. I mean, probably this is a draw here. But I win c7, then I can maybe exchange my doubled pawn, so it's also not going to be so much fun for black. Yeah, he went rook f8, I took and went knight c4, inviting him now to take on c4, because even if he does so, I will have the d file and also the more active bishop. So he gave a check, e3, f4, trying to see counterplay, because, yeah, I mean, if he takes, then now even e5 is hanging, rook d7 is coming, so I think he should do that. I took on e5, now he took on c4, took on e3, and now I think it was an important decision just to take on e3. At first, the move which looks very logical is to go for f4 and then just trying to pick up the pawn on e3. But now he has g5, and he does have, I would say, sufficient counter chances. Still, he has to be incredibly precise here to hold the game, but I think this was just much stronger. Bishop takes e3 check, and now king b2. He gave another check, king goes to c3, and as you see, I'm threatening rook d7, c7 is weak, and it's quite difficult for him. He tried to have the move rook f7 in response to rook d7, but here I already saw a very good continuation for me, which is to take here, and now not to take the pawn on c7. If I do that, then black should not really have any problems to hold a draw, because my extra pawn is not going anywhere. But instead I had the move bishop d4. Now his problem is that if he goes to the pawn endgame, I will just go to c5 and then put him into Zugzwang at some point, and then he's gonna lose the pawn on c6 and therefore lose the game. So he needed to keep the bishops on the board, but then I win the way more important pawn on a7, and this means a technical win for me. It was still not so easy. I'm gonna go through the rest of the moves a bit faster. but I think the win was never in doubt. At some point, I exchanged my a4 pawn for the c5 pawn, and then went bishop d4. Still, all of those pawn endgames are obviously losing. Bishop h4, and now I did not really want to go king e5 because I didn't want to allow him to go king b4, but it turns out that this was, if he would have defended better later on, this would have been probably the only way to actually make progress. And after king b4, we're going to have a look at a similar position later on as well. Yeah, so I moved around a bit, and in this position here he went bishop c3, which just allowed me a quick win with king g5, threatening king h6, and after bishop g7 I had h4. h5, and after taking, now my king can finally enter here, and a couple of moves later here he resigned because king f7, king g8 is coming and the h-pawn is going to fall, and therefore I will easily win. What would have been a bit more stubborn would be just to keep the bishop on f6, not allowing me to get the move king g5. And this is what I said earlier, I have to go for this idea of bishop d4 now. And anyway, king e5 and allow king b4. Now I can go c5, and here probably bishop f2 is the best square. And well, if he goes after this pawn, I can even try to pick up the c6 pawn. And after bishop e7, I have h4. And if he takes on c5, then again, the pawn endgame is winning here with king f6. I'm not so sure if this would also be winning here, because if I don't have the pawn on h4, let me just quickly go through that. Might not be so clear. How does this go? King d3, h6 here. Yeah, I mean, this might also be winning, but here at least black has good drawing chances, as we've seen in Norway chess. Gukesh against Vincent in their classical game, where Gukesh was able to hold such an endgame, even a much worse version as far as I could understand. So that's why h4 is important. And now if we reach this endgame, white will just be a full tempo up, which means that there will not be even a queen endgame where black has some chances. Anyway, I was quite happy with this game. Obviously, Sindarov already back then was extremely strong, 26-74. And that meant that I was in a lead with +1, and we are heading to the next game of the match, where I had the black pieces. Back then, Sindarov with white was a pure e4 player. Now we've seen that he's actually playing more d4 than e4, and did a great job with that as well in the candidates. But he did play a lot of Italian, a lot of interesting Italians, often with knight c3. There he started with a3, possibly just to confuse me or get me out of theory, which definitely worked. And I think that I did make a decision which was not so great here after knight c3. We have a completely non-theoretical position, but as it is often in those lines, the idea that white can play knight a4 to win the bishop pair. And I played bishop e6 here, which exactly allows his idea with knight a4. And I also wanted to show this game because he really showed the plans of the game, of this structure extremely well. And I was very, very impressed by how he handled the position. Now, what would have been better here for me, a move like h6 looks risky to me because white still hasn't castled and he can try to attack with g4, g5. But something like a6 or a5, probably a5 is the better move, would have been better. And now I'm actually intending to go bishop e6 next, and white will not have the move knight a4. And yeah, now the position is just equal, but still playable for both sides, of course. Yeah, after he got this, he was definitely quite happy. Here, black has a few different plans. Usually the main idea is to play on the f file, sometimes ideas with knight h5 as well. That usually, actually I'm not so sure if it would work here, but I don't think so. Usually this knight takes e5 idea works only if the pawn is on c3, then sometimes it can work for black because then the pawn on d3 would be hanging. But here it is protected, so this just doesn't work here. So I went queen e8. c3, knight e7, trying to improve the knight to g6, which still looks logical. And now the very typical move, rook a2 in this position. The rook on the second rank is quite useful. First of all, f2 is protected. And, well, that is probably the main idea, but it can also sometimes be useful on the d file. It can go to d2, maybe even on the c file. So this is a very typical I always like to say multi-vitamin move. I don't know if that's a common term, but it does quite a few quite a few useful jobs, and therefore it's a good move. So I went king h8, looks fairly logical to me. Rook e1, h6. And he played g3, another way to improve the position, followed by king g2. It also stops me from getting any knight h5, knight f4 ideas. If I look at the whole position now, I would maybe consider to play with queen d7 and then h6, rook f7, rook f8, which does look a little bit more active to me, rather than going for queen e8. But I did go for this, and after g3 I went rook f7 here, and only then went for queen d7, so I'm kind of losing a tempo here. Now I understood that I have to go for rook f8. I think I still had hopes with this move queen e8 to get knight h5, but I think I realized that it's just not really doing anything, because he can still take and go g3. And now what is my knight actually doing on h5? If queen g6, maybe white can go knight h4, for example, and I have to go back with my queen. So let's go a bit further again. Now finally he took on b6. White is often waiting with this decision a bit, because he still keeps the option maybe to play c4, threatening c5 at the right time. And also now he's opening up my a file, so that's often an idea for white just to wait. But now he finally took because he wanted to continue with a4. So typically in this structure, I mean, I should have maybe mentioned that a bit earlier. What is black's problem is the doubled pawns. So black does not really have many active pawn breaks, because once d5 is played, then e5 gets extremely weak and often just can be captured after e takes d5. And what else can black do? The only active play I could have would be on the king side, but I'm not really getting anywhere there. If I go rook f8, I'm not really threatening anything for the moment. But white can, worst case, move the knight, and then how do I actually continue here? And white will play bishop e3 and continue his play on the queen side. And another problem is are my doubled pawns on the queen side as well. They are also not mobile at all, and white can choose at which point he wants to break there. Which in the game, I wanted to do something active, but it probably only made things worse. I played b5, forcing him to go a5, and then trying to get rid of my double pawn by going b6. Still, I think my position is very unpleasant, but maybe I should just wait here and kind of wait for my demise. Well, the position is not so bad here. I mean, just to stay objective, white is definitely better. But I could maybe just wait around and see what white is doing, because whenever a5 is coming, I can at least trade some pawns. But here, for example, would be thinking for white to go for c4. And the position is unpleasant for sure. White can slowly improve the position and then at the right time go b5 followed by a5. And then possibly try to seize control over the a file as well. And my knights are also not really doing much at all here. So I went for this. Bishop e3 was a good move. I took on e5. He took with the rook, which was also good, because now the a pawn is also quite dangerous. And here I went for c5, which had the idea to restrict his bishop on e3, but it also weakened the pawn on b5. So this really made things much worse. After rook f8, I'm still kind of hanging in there. Something like queen b3, I guess, rook a8. But still, the position is not good for me. But this would have been better. After c5, queen b3, queen e8, with the idea to bring the rook to b7 or to a7. Rook b1, rook b7. Now he found the nice final maneuver. Quick question, how can white improve his position? a6 does not really do anything much yet. I could maybe even go rook a7 here, or rook b6, but I mean, I would be very happy to get something like this now. I'm at least no material down, and well, white may still be better here with ideas to play knight d2, knight c4. It's not the worst which I've seen in this game. But he found this very nice idea. He played knight d2, and now I actually cannot stop him from getting knight c4 on the next move, because my rook on b7 is going to be hanging, so I cannot take. Knight f8, knight c4, and queen d8, a6. I guess that also knight b6 would have been pretty good here, now that I look at it, but maybe I still have this move, knight d7. And if he takes here, I could have some chances perhaps to regain the pawn. So I think how he played was really good, because if rook a7, he can just take. Obviously, I can never take on c4 anyway, because the rook is hanging. So rook b8, a7, rook b7. And now rook a1, queen a8, knight takes d6, and my position is just completely collapsing here. I'm now thinking after rook b8, after rook a8, what was my problem? It does look like a better defense. Queen takes b5, rook takes a7. Well, I guess that he is probably just gonna be winning after queen b6. But, you know, he needs to do that, and maybe I can, well, d5, knight takes e5, he's also threatening knight takes f, he's also threatening knight f7, so I think it's just collapsing here. So this is probably what I didn't like here. Anyway, the position is lost here, but, you know, I was quite impressed by his handling of the position. Anyway, very typical plans, but still, especially if you're playing this from the white side, also from the black side, it's quite useful to notice these different plans, and I think he showed them quite well. All right, so let's go to the Armageddon game, where back then, and I think they still have the system in some tournaments, you have to bid for the time. I think also in the World Cup, the system is similar in the final Armageddon game, if I'm not mixing things up now, where both players bid for a time, and I almost forgot the system by now, it's quite embarrassing. And the player that bids, is it lower or higher? Please, if any one of you knows, I always forget how the system works. Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, I picked the black color, and I guess I bid the lower time than he did. I think this is how it worked. Anyway, I got the black pieces, and I had something like 7 minutes, I guess, and he had around 10 minutes or something like that. But of course, for him, it was a must-win situation, as it is usually in must-win games. Since the previous game with the Italian didn't go so well for me, I decided to opt for the French, which actually went quite well for me in the opening stage. He went for this 2 knights defense, and now went for a transposition to another system with knight e2. I went for queen b6, a3, took on d4 and went f6, which I think I've also played in the World Cup against Dimitrios Mastrovasidis, also in one of the tiebreak games where he beat me. And I think he went for something like g3. I'm not so sure if he actually went a3. He might have, I'm pretty sure that he went g3 immediately, and then I went for f6. But this is how Sindarov played. And here he played the move knight g3, which is actually not so good. I think white usually goes back knight c3, then often bishop d3 or something like that. Still g3 ideas are also there. This might actually be the main line. If I'm not mixing things up here, there is some line like this, but I could be completely wrong. With some bishop c5, some endgame will appear, but honestly, I have no idea how it appeared, so I'll just stop talking about the opening and continue with the game. He went for knight g3. And also here, there would have been this nice chance for me to play e5, which actually gives me quite a significant advantage at this point. Because his problem is, if he takes here, then I have knight g4, and it's very difficult to protect the f2 pawn. And white is in big trouble after e5. But I played bishop d6 rather quickly, which also gives me a playable position. And here went for bishop e3, sacrificing the pawn on b2, which was probably not the best. He should probably continue with some slower move like rook e1 and protecting the pawn first. Maybe a move like b4 could also be considered. But, you know, I have my own ideas, could maybe think about pushing e5, and the position should also be okay for me. But he gave me the pawn on b2, and he does win back the pawn on b7, but after that his play doesn't really continue. He did still come up with the best practical option, which is to take on d7 and go knight g5, sacrificing the exchange, but it's not... it's maybe still sufficient compensation, but later on I took over. I played knight f6, protecting h7. I think this is the only way, otherwise I need to worry about some sacrifices like this would look quite scary to me here. And also h6 is just a weakening move, and now he can take on e6, so knight f6 makes a lot of sense. He took on e6, I took on g3, just trying to get rid of one attacker of his. hg3, rook f8, knight f4, queen d6. I think that was all good from my side, but I started playing for a draw too much around here. I think around here with rook bd8, which is a bit of a passive move. the engine wants to play something like knight b4 to force the bishop to a more passive square, to b1, for example, and then just continue with something like rook c8, and black just is much better here. Still, white has decent practical chances, I think, to ask some questions, but the evaluation was around -1 here, so I am significantly better. I went rook d8, he went rook c1, rook f8, and here he started to become quite active. Queen f6, rook c7, and here I decided to give back the exchange, which leads to an extremely drawish endgame. But still, white does have the easier play here, just because his rook is more active. Generally, rook and bishop are the better duo, and my d-pawn can sometimes be a little bit weak as well. And the main problem here was that I was obviously lower on time than he was. I guess I was around 2-3 minutes entering this endgame, and he had, I guess, something like 5-6 minutes, which already gave me a bad feeling, because he can play this endgame more or less forever, and this is also what he ended up doing. And he was doing so very well, always asking questions and making me think. And bishop d7 was also, for example, an interesting move, just restricting my knight. Rook c7, knight c5. Of course, rook endgames I would easily hold, also probably with 1 minute on the clock. But he kept the bishop, and I was quite happy with my setup here, putting the knight to f6 and the rook to d7. And I thought, nothing bad can now happen to me. But still, I don't really have any active ideas. Ended up pushing d4, not allowing his king to d4. But he's just started playing on the king side. I went for g5, h6. Still, everything is completely fine here. Even here with my king cut off. But a bit later, it started to become unpleasant. I'm thinking, at some point I could try to play more actively, but I don't really see exactly how, because I have to stay close by with my rook, I think. Well, maybe I could think about something like this, but then maybe my d4 pawn could end up in trouble. Still rook c4, rook d6. So anyway, the position is a complete draw, but I just tried to make some moves more or less faster. He got his king to d3. And finally, after moving around forever, he played the move f4 here. And here I realized that it's really not so easy anymore for me. Still, it's complete zeros. The engine even suggested playing something like this and says that everything is fine here, because white doesn't really have any way to make progress. If g5 comes, then just too many pawns get off the board. King e5 could potentially run into knight takes g4. Even though this will probably be a quick way to already lose the game because of king d6. This looks lost, unless I'm missing something. So rook b7 was a move here. And yeah, computer says it's a complete draw, but especially with low time, this is anything but easy. I played knight g8, which is still okay. But now I don't have my optimal setup here anymore. I was kind of in a Zugzwang situation here, actually. I want to get my rook to d6, but I had to move it before, so I didn't really see a way to keep my good setup. Also, if I move with my king, he could maybe play rook a7, so I didn't like that as well. So I decided to switch the setup. But now he's also threatening at some point to go rook a6, and I should have probably done something like this here. I guess maybe also going rook d6 again would be possible. But I was a bit panicking at this point, also I guess pretty low on time. And here was where I completely lost the game with knight d5. And now king f7, because he just went to this rook endgame, which is just winning for him. As long as he doesn't take on g5. So that was also a nice move, because the pawn endgame is just losing. And after that, yeah, he was just easily winning. So here I actually still could have saved the draw with the move king g7. Rook g6 check, this is what I didn't like. But it turns out that after this move, I have the move knight f6. And he cannot go to the rook endgame here, because I don't take on d5, but I can take on g6. So this was a way to still hold the draw, but okay, even this, I don't really see how this is now such an easy draw. Maybe rook g8 is holding by force, and then take on f4, take on g4. I actually cannot do that, because then bishop e6 is going to be there. But h6 is also hanging, so I guess this is still holding, and I have a check in the end. Anyway, that was my match against Sindarov. It was a pretty cool experience, especially looking back now, since he is the World Championship challenger. And something which makes me happy, of course, is the first game which I was able to win against him, which I think was a pretty good one. And yeah, always looking back nicely to that experience. Obviously, he was able to advance then, and I think that was the end of the event for me. But actually always really enjoyed playing those rapid tournaments. They did have this chess.com open also this year, but I don't think I played in any single game there because they completely changed the whole system that only a handful of players are able to go to the next stage, and that was kind of demotivating for me because, you know, to be realistic, I'm probably not going to end up top 10 or top 5 or top 3, whatever it is that are currently going to the next stage. But still, I'm going to use those tournaments just for practice in the future, because the system was that only grandmasters can participate, and I think just a handful of qualifiers who qualified through some qualification tournaments. Anyway, that was it for now for this match. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys hopefully soon. Again, I'm a bit inactive now because I'm preparing for my match with Navarra, because I'm taking that as serious as possible, but I'll be back hopefully soon. Until then, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you soon.